I paid for my girlfriend to go to Harvard. She left right after graduation, said, I outgrew you before I even got in. I just bought the company she wanted to work for. Now she's in sales, and I'm on the Forbes list. I remember the first time I met Emily. It was at a friend's party, one of those casual get-togethers where you barely know anyone, but you end up talking to someone who feels like they've been waiting for you their whole life. She was standing by the window, looking out at the city lights, a little disconnected from the chatter around her. When I approached her, there was no forced small talk. It was as if we were both waiting for the right moment, the right words. She told me she had big plans. She spoke about Harvard like it was something she was destined for, like it wasn't even a question of whether she would get in, but rather when. And I saw it in her eyes, the fire, the ambition. She wasn't just another girl with a dream. She was going to make it happen. That's what I told myself. And that's why, when she looked at me and said, I don't know how I'll pay for it all, I didn't hesitate. I had my business, nothing too grand yet, but enough to keep me afloat. I had the means to help her. It felt like the right thing to do. More than that, I wanted to. The idea of being part of her journey, of seeing her grow, of supporting her dreams. It felt like we were building something together. I wasn't just helping her financially, I was becoming part of her future. The months that followed were a blur of paperwork, plans, and transfers. I paid for everything. Tuition, books, housing, internships, even trips abroad for networking events. I wanted her to feel free, to focus on her studies and her future. I didn't want her to be weighed down by the financial burden of it all. It was my way of showing her that I believed in her, more than anyone else. But over time, I began to realize something. The more I gave, the more she took. Not in a selfish way. She was always grateful. But there was this growing distance between us. Not just physical distance, though there was that too, with her in Boston and me running my business back home. But emotional distance. I didn't have a name for it at first. I kept telling myself it was just the pressure of her studies, the weight of everything she was trying to achieve. But deep down, I felt it. She was changing. I didn't mind at first. After all, she was going to be someone. I wanted her to be someone. I was proud of her, even when she started coming home less frequently, even when her calls grew shorter. I told myself it was all part of the process. She was becoming who she was meant to be, and I was part of that. But then came the graduation. It was supposed to be our moment. After everything she had been through, everything I had done for her, this was supposed to be the payoff. I was going to be there, watching her walk across that stage, knowing I played a part in getting her there. I imagined it in my head, the proud look on her face, the excitement in her eyes as she turned to me and said, Thank you. I couldn't have done this without you. Instead, it went like this. She told me she was leaving, not just the apartment, not just for a few weeks to go on a vacation or take a break. She was leaving us completely. And the words she said, they still haunt me even now. I was outgrowing you even before I enrolled. There was no apology in her voice, no regret, no sign that this was hard for her. It was as if it was inevitable. And she didn't even seem angry. She didn't want to fight. She didn't want to make a scene. She just left. I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to scream, to beg her to stay. I wanted to remind her of everything I had done for her. But I didn't. I didn't make a scene. That's not who I was. So I just stood there frozen as she walked out the door. I don't remember much of the next few weeks. I suppose I was in shock. I threw myself into work, harder than I ever had before. I started making deals, expanding the business. But there was something in my chest that wouldn't go away. Something empty. Something that gnawed at me, telling me that I had been played. She was gone, and now I had nothing. No one to share my success with. No one to talk to late at night about the things that mattered. She was supposed to be the one who saw me through it all, just like I had seen her through everything. But that was over now. Still, I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something wasn't right, that I had missed something. She had walked away without a second thought, and I had nothing left but questions. Why? Why had she left me like that? Was it really that simple for her? Was I just the guy who helped her get to where she needed to be? And then a few months later, something unexpected happened. I got a call from a company. It was one I had never heard of before. But they were offering me an opportunity, an acquisition. They wanted to sell, and they wanted me to buy. The price was steep, but not impossible. So I bought it. And as I sat in my office staring at the paperwork, I realized something. The company I had just acquired was the very same one Emily had always dreamed of working for. The one she'd talked about nonstop during our late-night conversations. No one knew that I had bought it. I wasn't going to advertise the fact. I wasn't even going to tell anyone at work. I'd keep it quiet. I'd stay in the shadows. And then, months later, she walked in for an interview. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had come back into my world without knowing it. And I knew one thing for sure. This time she wouldn't have me. Not the way she once had. I tried to tell myself that I wasn't doing this for revenge. I wasn't. I wasn't some petty man who sat around thinking about how to get back at someone who had left him. No, I wasn't that person. I was someone who had moved on. Someone who had built something bigger than I ever could have imagined. But as the days passed after the interview, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Emily didn't know it yet, but I was watching her every day. From the moment she walked in for her first shift in the sales department, I watched her with the kind of cold detachment that I had perfected over the years. She was everything I remembered. Brilliant, poised, driven. But there was something different now. Something off. She didn't have that same innocent excitement, that youthful ambition that once made her so captivating. She was older now, more seasoned in the harsh world she had chosen for herself. But that fire, the same fire that once burned so brightly, was still there. She just didn't know it, but she was walking into my world now. And I had the power, not just the financial power, but the power of knowing everything. I knew her weaknesses. I knew how she worked, how she thought. I had seen it all before. When she walked into the office for the first time, I was sitting in my private office, observing her through the tinted glass. She was in her element, speaking to her new coworkers, laughing, trying to make friends, trying to fit in. She had that same charm I remembered, but there was a coldness to her that I couldn't ignore. She was trying so hard to prove that she was in control, that she was beyond the person she had been when we were together. I wasn't interested in seeing her fail. That wasn't the goal. I had no intention of humiliating her. She didn't deserve that kind of public spectacle. My revenge was going to be quiet, subtle, so perfect that she wouldn't even know it was happening until it was too late. Her first few weeks were interesting. She was still the same Emily, but she was playing a game now, and she didn't even realize it. The sales department was a tough place to work. The competition was fierce. The targets were brutal. But I didn't care. I wasn't concerned about how she performed or how well she hit her KPIs. That was the beauty of it. I controlled the rules, I controlled the environment, and as long as I kept my distance, as long as I didn't show my hand too soon, I could make sure the game played out exactly how I wanted. But I needed her to understand something. I needed her to feel what I felt, to experience the weight of betrayal and indifference, the slow, suffocating pressure of being stuck in a situation where every move you make feels like you're suffocating, like you're struggling for breath but can't get out. I had done the work. My business was thriving. I was on the verge of something even bigger: expansion, more acquisitions, greater influence. I had everything she had once dreamed of, but I wasn't flaunting it. No, I was letting her come to it on her own, piece by piece. It didn't take long for her to start feeling the pressure. The sales department wasn't easy. The numbers didn't lie. And no matter how much charm she used, no matter how hard she tried to network and win over her superiors, the bottom line was clear. She wasn't hitting her targets. I could see it, the stress building in her eyes, the sleepless nights, the way she looked at her colleagues, trying to hide her frustration. But the numbers kept slipping through her fingers. It wasn't just about the numbers, though. It was about the realization that she had no control anymore. She was no longer the one in charge. She was a cog in the machine, and it was a machine that I owned. I could have let her off easy. I could have given her a pass, but I didn't. There were no bonuses. The contract was strict, unforgiving. I made sure she didn't have any wiggle room. And every day she came in, I watched her struggle, watched her pretend like everything was fine. like she was still that ambitious, untouchable woman I had once known. But she wasn't. She was just like everyone else now, a cog in the wheel. One evening, I happened to be in the office late, catching up on some work, reading through some files. The lights in the hallway flickered, and I could hear the faint sound of heels on the concrete floor. She passed my office, her face drawn and tired. She had been working overtime, trying to meet her targets. It wasn't going well. And then something unexpected happened. She stopped outside my office door. Just for a second. I don't think she knew I was there, but I could hear her soft sigh. The frustration, the exhaustion. It was the same feeling I had felt for months after she left. The same feeling I had tried to bury deep inside me. I almost wanted to walk out and ask her how she was doing. Almost. But I didn't. Instead, I just sat back in my chair and waited. She eventually walked away. I didn't move. I didn't show myself. I didn't want her to know I was watching. It wasn't time yet. A few days later, I picked up a magazine in the break room. The front cover read, Forbes, the top 100 entrepreneurs of 2024. As I flicked through the pages, I spotted a familiar face. It was mine. The article was brief, but there I was, in the center of it all. Founder and CEO, John Morrow, the man who turned his passion into a billion-dollar company. I smiled to myself. She would have seen it too. The recognition, the success. But that wasn't the best part. The best part was the next day when she saw it. When she walked into the office and stared at the magazine on the break room table, realizing exactly who had been pulling the strings all along. She never said a word, but I knew she knew. The game had changed, and she was playing on my terms now. But the beauty of it was, she still didn't know how the story would end. The pressure was starting to show. I noticed it in the way Emily moved, the way her shoulders drooped a little more each day. She was no longer the confident, driven woman I had known. She was tired. The sales targets were too high, the expectations too overwhelming. The numbers didn't add up, no matter how much she twisted and turned them. Her colleagues whispered behind her back. Everyone noticed her slipping. Everyone knew she was struggling. But I didn't care about her failure. I wasn't doing this for the satisfaction of watching her falter. That would have been too easy, too predictable. My plan had always been more subtle, more refined. She hadn't figured it out yet. She didn't know the depth of the trap she'd walked into. But it wouldn't take long now. I could feel it in the way she avoided certain meetings, the way she always seemed to be one step behind in the conversations. She was drowning in her own pride, and that was exactly where I wanted her. Alone, with no way out but to face the consequences of her own choices. The first few weeks were an exercise in subtlety. I made sure her performance was always just below the threshold. Not so bad that she would be fired, but bad enough that she couldn't shine. She had to be stuck in the middle of everything, constantly working but never progressing. It was a kind of suffocation, a slow burn that would eventually break her. I would see her walking into the office early in the morning and leaving late at night. But she wasn't going anywhere. Not really. Every time she thought she might catch a break, the target would be moved just out of reach. Every time she thought she might be recognized, someone else would get the glory. She was living on the edge of exhaustion, but I made sure no one could see it. No one except me. One day I watched her from behind the frosted glass of my office door as she passed by the conference room. Her face was pale, and there was a hint of panic in her eyes as she tried to gather her thoughts before an important meeting. I could tell she was struggling to keep up with the fast-paced environment. The pressure was breaking her. But there was something more, something deeper than just the sales quotas or the pressure of the job. It was the weight of what she had left behind, the reality that she had chosen to leave everything we had built together. She had outgrown me, she said. I was no longer the man she wanted. She needed someone who could keep up with her ambition. But here she was now, stuck in the same cycle, struggling to prove herself, all while working for a company she couldn't even begin to fathom was mine. I felt a brief flash of something. Anger, sadness, regret. I wasn't sure, but I quickly pushed it down, buried it deep within me. I had no time for those feelings anymore. I had built this empire, and now she would have to play by my rules. She would have to follow my game. The weeks dragged on. I kept my distance, staying behind the scenes, watching her falter. And yet every day she seemed to be hanging on. She would smile at her coworkers, pretending everything was fine. She would act like she wasn't broken. But I saw through it all. She was unraveling bit by bit. One morning she walked into the office looking different. Her eyes were bloodshot, and there was a quiet desperation in her steps. It wasn't like the usual morning rush. There was a heaviness to her movements, like she was carrying the weight of the world. I knew what had happened. The sales team had been called into a meeting with upper management. The same meeting where she was going to be told without the sugarcoating that her performance was unacceptable. I knew she wouldn't take it well. But the thing was, I didn't need her to. I didn't need her to react. All I needed was for her to understand, to see the futility of it all. She had wanted something more, something bigger, but the bigger picture wasn't hers to control anymore. Not when I was behind the scenes. That afternoon, as I sat at my desk, I saw her walking towards the elevators. She looked exhausted, deflated. Her shoulders were slumped, her head down. I didn't need to ask. I knew exactly what had happened. She hadn't hit her target. She hadn't even come close. When the elevator doors slid shut, I picked up the phone. A few words to the right person, and I could feel the small shift in the power balance. I had already instructed HR to tighten her contract. No bonuses, no rewards. She had to hit the unreasonably high targets if she wanted any kind of recognition. No safety net, no escape. But I wasn't done yet. I made sure that her department manager was aware of her struggles. I didn't need to get involved directly. I didn't need to put myself in her path. That would have been too obvious. No, the power was in the whispers, the ones that came when she wasn't around. The whispers about her performance, the whispers about her inability to keep up, the whispers about how she might not be long for this world. The next week I was in the office when I heard her voice on the phone. She was speaking to someone from HR, trying to negotiate some terms, trying to find a way out. I knew it wasn't going to work. There was no room for negotiation. I had made sure of that. It was time for her to see the truth. That evening, after everyone had left the office, I made my move. I walked past the sales department, my footsteps echoing in the silent hallways. I paused by the door to her cubicle, taking a moment to let the weight of it all settle in. I didn't need to say anything. I didn't need to gloat or lecture her. I just stood there for a moment, watching her, still working, still pretending to have it all together. Then I turned and walked away. She was on her own now, and she was never going to leave my game. Not until I decided it was over. And that, I thought, was the beauty of it, the quiet control, the finality of it. Time was a strange thing when you had nothing to prove. I had built my empire step by step, stone by stone. I didn't need to make a spectacle of things. I didn't need to shout or throw punches. Everything I had ever wanted, everything I had fought for, was right in front of me. And Emily? She was still struggling. She still hadn't figured out the game. She still didn't know who was controlling her fate. And the truth was, I wasn't interested in watching her fail any longer. Watching her spin in circles, thinking she could escape the web she'd tangled herself in, wasn't satisfying anymore. No, the game had to end. But it would end on my terms, with no noise, no drama, just finality. The days following her struggle with HR were tense. She knew something was off, but she couldn't put her finger on it. There was an aura of doubt around her now. People noticed it. She had become the subject of whispered conversations. The once vibrant employee, the promising future, had turned into just another cog in the machine. She was losing her spark. The fire that had once burned so brightly in her had dimmed, and no matter how hard she worked, she couldn't reignite it. Her colleagues weren't as friendly as they had been before. The once friendly smiles were replaced with cold, calculating nods. I had been careful. I had made sure the right people knew where she stood now. Her position in the company, once so full of promise, had become a dead end. A few months had passed since the day she realized she wasn't going anywhere, and I could tell she was starting to crack. But it wasn't the usual cracking you might expect. It wasn't the breakdown that came from the pressure, or the late nights, or the failures piling up. Number Emily was cracking in a way that made her realize something deeper, something far more uncomfortable. She had underestimated me, and now she was beginning to understand that. The reality of it was finally sinking in. She had thought she could climb higher than me, that she could leave me behind. But I had been the one who had set the foundation. I had been the one who had made sure everything was in place, waiting for her to fall into the trap. It all came to a head one afternoon when Emily called me into her office. She had been avoiding me for weeks, probably too proud to confront me, but there she was, standing at the door of her cubicle, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly. "Can I talk to you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I took my time walking into her office, making sure to keep my expression neutral. I didn't want her to think I cared, because I didn't. She gestured to the chair across from her desk, and I sat down, leaning back slightly, trying not to make it obvious that I was in complete control. The room was quiet, save for the hum of the fluorescent lights above. The tension was palpable. I could see the war going on in her mind. She had known this moment was coming, but now that it was here, she was afraid of what would come next. "I'm not happy here," she started, her voice fragile. "I don't think I can keep doing this. The targets are impossible. Everyone's against me and—" She trailed off as if she were struggling to find the right words. "I just don't know if this is the right place for me anymore." I could see it now, the desperation in her eyes. She was defeated, and it was exactly what I had been waiting for. Her pride had finally broken. But I wasn't going to let her off easy. I wasn't going to throw her a lifeline, as much as she expected me to. That was the mistake she had made before. She had thought I would always be there, always ready to pull her out when she stumbled. But that wasn't the way this worked anymore. "Emily," I said, my voice calm, measured, "you're here because you wanted to be. You came to me, remember? You were the one who left, the one who wanted more. And now, look where you are." I paused, letting the words sink in. "You were good once, but you weren't good enough. And now you're stuck in a job you hate, with no way out." Her eyes flickered with something: hurt, shame, frustration. But I wasn't interested in her emotions anymore. That part of me had died a long time ago. "I gave you everything, Emily. I gave you a future. I paid for your education, your life, everything you wanted. And in return, you left me. You walked away like it meant nothing." Like I meant nothing. My voice hardened, but I kept it controlled. "But now? Now you work for me, under my terms, and there's no way out. Not anymore." She swallowed hard, and for the first time since I had walked in, she looked at me with a different kind of awareness. It wasn't the look of someone who had been deceived. It wasn't the look of someone who was angry. It was the look of someone who knew she was trapped. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly, her voice barely audible. I never meant to hurt you." I leaned forward, my hands clasped in front of me. "You did hurt me, but that's not why I'm doing this. You needed to learn something, Emily. You needed to learn what happens when you take everything someone gives you and throw it all away." She fell silent, and I could see the tears welling in her eyes. But I wasn't moved by them. I wasn't swayed by her emotions. This wasn't about redemption for her. This was about the cold, hard truth, and I had already won. "You can't undo the past," I said, my voice soft but final. "And you can't escape the consequences of your choices. This is your life now. You live with it." With that, I stood up, straightened my jacket, and turned to walk out of the office. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The game was over, and I had won.